The night was colder than usual, and the rain hitting the city streets sounded like whispers of judgment, soft, relentless, and impossible to ignore. What happens, the narrator's voice asks, when the man who swore to uphold the law starts believing he's above it? Welcome back to Swift Tale, where every story hides a truth, and every truth hides a twist. If you're visiting for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because tonight's story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, justice, and karma. Tell me, have you ever met someone so certain of their own authority that they believed the rules simply didn't apply to them? Detective Marcus Hale was that man. To the world, he was a hero, a name the media glorified, a face the department displayed with pride. He'd earned medals, given speeches, and commanded respect in every precinct hallway. But behind that polished badge and carefully rehearsed smile lived a man who'd long forgotten what justice meant. To Marcus, the badge wasn't a symbol of duty, it was armor, protection, and power. And power, as he believed, was his birthright. In the city of Rockford, where crime festered like an open wound, Marcus had built his reputation on results. He didn't care how those results came. Whether it meant bending the rules, silencing witnesses, or fabricating a confession, he did what he had to do. His colleagues whispered about his methods, but none dared challenge him. After all, who would go against the most decorated detective in the city? Those who tried found their careers mysteriously derailed, their reputations destroyed. Marcus was untouchable, or so he thought. Tonight's story isn't just about a man with a badge. It's about what happens when arrogance collides with truth, when the very system designed to protect people turns into a weapon in the wrong hands. Marcus's story matters because it reminds us of something deeply human, that power can blind and justice can strike when least expected. So stay with me as we step into the shadowed streets of Rockford, a city that hides its sins beneath flashing sirens and courtroom walls, a city where one woman will soon stand up against everything Marcus represents. And when she does, his empire of fear will begin to crumble piece by piece. This is the story of how a single act of arrogance led a man who thought himself above the law to face the very justice he tried to control. It's a story about pride, punishment, and the quiet strength of a woman he underestimated. And before we dive in, ask yourself, what would you do if the person meant to protect you became your enemy? Because for Marcus Hale, that question isn't hypothetical, it's the beginning of his downfall. Detective Marcus Hale wasn't born powerful, he became powerful. The kind of power that seeps into a man's blood slowly like a poison disguised as pride. When he first joined the Rockford Police Department, he was full of fire and ideals. He talked about justice, about cleaning up the streets, about being the kind of cop the people could trust. But years on the force had a way of changing men. The first time he saw a criminal walk free because of a clever lawyer, something inside him shifted. If the system's broken, he told himself, then I'll be the one to fix it my way. From that moment, the badge on his chest wasn't a promise, it was permission. Marcus rose quickly through the ranks. He had the instincts, the charm, and the cold precision that made him a star in the department. Every time he solved a case, the chief praised him, the media celebrated him, and the mayor shook his hand. No one questioned his methods, they only looked at the results. And Marcus learned that as long as the city believed in his hero image, he could do whatever he wanted behind closed doors. He started to enjoy the fear in people's eyes when he flashed his badge. He liked the way suspects froze when he walked into a room. He learned how to manipulate the law, when to lose evidence, when to pressure a confession, when to make a file disappear. His voice carried authority, his words carried weight, and soon his ego carried him away. Colleagues whispered behind his back. Some admired his efficiency, others feared his temper, but no one confronted him. His partners came and went, either transferred out or left after realizing Marcus didn't play by the book. Yet somehow he always managed to stay clean. Internal affairs, they wouldn't touch him. Judges, they owed him favors. Journalists, they wrote what he wanted them to write. He was the golden boy of Rockford's law enforcement. At home, though, things were different. His wife Laura, once proud of his ambition, now barely recognized the man who came home late every night, smelling of whiskey and smoke. Their marriage had become a battlefield of silence and unspoken blame. She would look at him across the dinner table and ask softly, when did justice start meaning winning instead of doing right? Marcus would only glare, dismissing her words with the same coldness he used on suspects. The badge on his chest meant more to him than the ring on his finger. In his mind, he wasn't corrupt, he was realistic. The world was full of liars, cheats, and criminals, and he believed he was the only one capable of keeping them in line. He called it cleaning up the mess. Others called it abuse of power, but Marcus had long stopped caring what others thought. His office told the story of his pride, rows of framed commendations, medals glinting in the light, photos of him shaking hands with city officials. Yet behind those trophies lay a darker truth. For every case he solved, there were two more where he had broken the rules. For every confession he obtained, someone had suffered. He just didn't see it that way anymore. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a hero. But the mirror never told the full story. It didn't show the fear in witnesses' eyes or the lives he had destroyed along the way. It didn't show the small cracks forming in his own armor, the guilt buried deep under arrogance, waiting for the right moment to surface. And that moment was coming. For now, Marcus remained untouchable, a king in his castle of authority. He walked through the precinct halls like he owned them, his boots echoing against the tiled floor. Every rookie straightened up when he passed. Every superior turned a blind eye to his shortcuts. But pride has a sound too, it's the faint echo before the fall. And in the shadows of Rockford, someone was watching him closely. A woman he hadn't met yet, but one who would soon turn his entire world upside down. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the next arrest he made would not be another victory, it would be the start of his undoing. Because when a man believes his badge makes him untouchable, it only takes one wrong woman to remind him that no one is above the law. The city of Rockford was restless that night. The rain had stopped, but the streets still shimmered with puddles reflecting red and blue lights from the squad cars. Detective Marcus Hale stood outside an old brick warehouse, his hands on his hips, his badge glinting under the flickering street lamp. A tip had come in earlier that day, a supposed money laundering operation tied to one of the city's most elusive crime rings. Marcus could feel it, another win, another headline. Inside, his team waited for his signal. "Remember," he barked, "we're not leaving until someone's in cuffs." His voice carried that same commanding tone, sharp, confident, almost rehearsed. He didn't care who was guilty or not. Someone would pay tonight, that's how Marcus operated. When the door burst open, chaos followed. Shouts, footsteps, the sound of papers scattering and metal clanging. Within minutes, a group of workers was lined up against the wall, hands raised. Marcus walked down the row, inspecting faces as if shopping for guilt. Then his eyes stopped on her. Evelyn Cross. She wasn't trembling like the others, she wasn't even trying to defend herself. She just stood there, calm, composed, her gaze steady as if she were the one in control. Her presence caught Marcus off guard. There was something unsettling about her silence. "You run this place?" he asked, circling her. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "I manage accounts," she replied evenly. "You're making a mistake." Marcus smirked. "I don't make mistakes, especially not with people like you." He didn't know who she was, only that she fit the profile his anonymous informant had described. That was enough for him. Within minutes, she was handcuffed, her wrists marked red from his firm grip. She didn't resist, didn't plead. She only said one thing before being led away. "Detective Hale, you just made the worst mistake of your life." The words lingered in the air long after she was gone. Marcus laughed it off at first, calling her bluff in front of his team. "They all say that," he told his partner, "until they see the inside of a cell." But deep down, something about her tone, calm, almost knowing, unsettled him. At the station, Evelyn's composure didn't break. She answered questions precisely, her eyes never flinching. Marcus tried his usual intimidation tactics, packing, slamming the table, twisting her words, but she remained unmoved. When he presented a document supposedly linking her to the criminal organization, she looked at it and smiled faintly. "You forged that," she said quietly. Marcus froze for a second. "Excuse me. That file, the timestamp's wrong. You copied it from a case 3 years ago." Her words hit harder than she could have known. He covered it with anger, throwing the file aside. "You think you can play smart with me? You're going away for a long time." Evelyn's expression softened, almost pitying. "You think your badge will protect you," she said, "but it won't, not from the truth." Marcus stormed out of the interrogation room, his pride bruised more than he cared to admit. He told his team to file the paperwork, insisting she was guilty. He didn't care that her records showed no prior crimes. He didn't care that the supposed evidence had gaps wide enough to drive a patrol car through. To Marcus, the case was simple. He'd found his suspect, and his reputation as the city's top detective would stay intact. But that night, as he sat in his car outside the precinct, rain returning in gentle taps against the windshield, Evelyn's words kept replaying in his head. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." He brushed it off with a sip of whiskey, convincing himself she was bluffing. But deep down in that corner of his conscience, he tried so hard to silence something whispered otherwise. What Marcus didn't know, what no one in the department yet realized, was that Evelyn Cross wasn't just another suspect. She was a woman on a mission, a woman with her own evidence, a woman who had spent years studying every move of men like Marcus. And while he believed he'd just caught a criminal, he had, in fact, handcuffed his own downfall. Because Evelyn wasn't the one being trapped that night, she was setting the trap. The holding cell was quiet except for the faint hum of the overhead light. Evelyn Cross sat on the metal bench, hands folded neatly in her lap, her face calm, almost too calm for someone facing criminal charges. The officers who walked past her couldn't figure her out. Most suspects broke within hours, but she seemed patient, like someone waiting for a bus she already knew would arrive. Outside, Detective Marcus Hale was still riding the thrill of another successful bust. Reporters were already calling, and his name was once again making rounds in the local news cycle. He smirked at the headlines, "Detective Hale strikes again." The man loved attention almost as much as he loved control. But in his rush for recognition, he'd failed to notice the small, deliberate smile that crossed Evelyn's face as she watched him from the interrogation room earlier. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. That night when the precinct quieted down and most officers went home, Evelyn made her first move. She requested her one phone call. Marcus didn't care who she called, he assumed it was some desperate attempt to reach a lawyer or a relative. He didn't know that the number she dialed connected directly to a private encrypted line, one that belonged to attorney Michael Grant, a high-profile defense lawyer who owed Evelyn more than a few favors. Within hours, her bail paperwork was filed. Within 12, the news had shifted. The same reporters praising Marcus earlier were now questioning the legality of the arrest. Lack of clear evidence, violation of rights, improper warrant procedure, words Marcus despised began appearing in print. Evelyn Cross wasn't just any woman. She was a former private investigator, one who had once worked closely with the very system Marcus corrupted. Years ago, she'd been part of a task force that exposed internal misconduct until the department quietly shut it down. Since then, she'd been gathering information, documenting every abuse of power she encountered. And at the top of her list was the man who just arrested her. In the dim light of her small apartment after release, Evelyn spread files across her table, names, dates, photographs, and confidential reports she'd collected over years. In the center of it all was a folder labeled Marcus Hale. Inside were details of his questionable arrests, falsified confessions, and sealed disciplinary warnings. Each page was a weapon, silent, powerful, and waiting for the right moment. To the outside world, she was just another accused woman trying to clear her name, but behind that quiet demeanor was a strategist. She knew how Marcus operated: impulsive, proud, reckless when challenged. And she would use that arrogance against him. In the following days, Evelyn played her role flawlessly. She attended court hearings with a calm confidence that made prosecutors uneasy. When Marcus took the stand, she didn't look angry or afraid, she looked amused. Every question she asked through her lawyer was designed to expose a tiny crack in his credibility, and with each session, those cracks widened. Marcus, of course, didn't see it. He was too focused on winning, too obsessed with proving himself right. When he saw Evelyn in court, his smirk returned. "Still think I made a mistake?" he whispered one morning as they passed in the hallway. Evelyn looked him straight in the eye. "No, detective," she said softly. "I think you made a choice and now you'll live with it." Those words haunted him more than he cared to admit. Something about her composure unnerved him, like she knew the ending of a story he hadn't finished reading. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread through the precinct. Some officers wondered if Marcus had gone too far this time. Internal affairs started sniffing around, and in a small, locked office across town, Evelyn's lawyer was preparing to file a motion that would make headlines: a formal accusation of corruption and evidence tampering against Detective Marcus Hale. The irony was almost poetic. Marcus thought he'd arrested a criminal. Instead, he'd dragged his own prosecutor straight into his world. Evelyn's plan wasn't driven by hatred, it was driven by justice. Years ago, Marcus's reckless actions had destroyed her family. Her brother, a young activist, had been wrongfully accused and convicted on one of Marcus's cases. He died in prison. She spent every day since collecting the truth Marcus buried beneath his badges and awards. Now, with him standing in court, she was finally ready to bring that truth into the light. Marcus Hale thought his badge made him invincible, but what he didn't understand, what men like him never understood, was that the law isn't a weapon for the powerful. It's a mirror, and when the right person holds it up, it reflects everything. Evelyn Cross was about to hold up that mirror. And when she did, the man who once stood above the law would finally see himself for what he truly was. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper, polished wood, and something else: tension. Every seat was filled. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked softly, and murmurs filled the air like static before a storm. In the middle of it all stood Detective Marcus Hale, adjusting his tie, that familiar smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He had faced countless trials before as a witness, as a hero, as the star detective whose word could sway a jury. Today, he believed it would be no different. But across the room, seated with unnerving composure, was Evelyn Cross. Dressed in a crisp charcoal suit, her expression unreadable, she didn't look like the accused. She looked like the accuser, and in many ways she was. The judge entered, the courtroom fell silent, and the clerk called the case. State versus Evelyn Cross. Marcus leaned back, confident, waiting for his turn to testify. He'd rehearsed his lines, practiced his charm. He knew how to manipulate a courtroom, a little humility, a little bravado, just enough to make the jury believe he was the victim of a criminal's lies. But from the moment Evelyn's attorney rose to speak, something felt off. The questions were sharper than usual, the tone more controlled. Every statement Marcus made seemed to meet a quiet, knowing smile from Evelyn's side of the room. And then, in a move that caught even the judge by surprise, Evelyn requested to represent herself. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Marcus turned to her, startled. "You think you can beat me without a lawyer?" he scoffed. Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. "I don't need to beat you, detective. I just need to show them who you really are." From that moment, the battle began. Evelyn's questions were calm, precise, and devastating. She started small inconsistencies in his arrest report, missing timestamps on evidence files, procedural oversights he'd thought no one would ever notice. Marcus tried to deflect, to twist his answers into authority, but her words sliced through his confidence like glass. "Detective Hale," she said at one point, her tone steady, "can you explain why your report lists the warehouse search at 8:42 p.m. when surveillance footage clearly shows you entering at 9:17? Marcus blinked. The clock must have been off. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "The footage was synced to the department's official time server. Are you suggesting your own department system?" The courtroom fell silent. A few jurors exchanged glances. Marcus felt heat crawl up his neck. "That's not what I said," he muttered. Evelyn's voice softened, but her words struck harder. "Then perhaps, detective, you'd like to tell us why your warrant lacks a verified judge's signature." The prosecutor shifted uneasily. Marcus's attorney stood to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Overruled. I'd like to hear his answer." Marcus hesitated. For the first time, he realized he was no longer in control. Evelyn had turned the courtroom into a chessboard, and every move he made, she countered with precision. The tension escalated as Evelyn began introducing evidence of Marcus's past misconduct, sealed records, witness statements, small details that should have been impossible for her to obtain. Each revelation peeled away another layer of his reputation. The jury watched him differently now, not as the heroic detective, but as a man cornered by his own lies. During a recess, Marcus stormed out of the courtroom, slamming the door behind him. His partner, Detective Vaughn, followed quietly. "What the hell's going on, Marcus?" he asked. "She's bluffing," Marcus snapped. "She doesn't have proof, she's just trying to rattle me." Vaughn hesitated. "She's rattling the judge too." Marcus glared at him. "She's nothing, I made her, I can end this." But as he returned to the courtroom, he could feel something shifting, a subtle but undeniable loss of control. His words began to sound defensive, his confidence turning brittle. The more he spoke, the clearer it became. Evelyn wasn't the one on trial anymore. He was. By the time the day ended, the air in the courtroom was thick with unease. Evelyn had not shouted, not accused, she had simply revealed, truth by truth, record by record, like a surgeon exposing a wound. As the gavel fell and the session adjourned, Marcus stood frozen, watching her gather her papers with deliberate calm. She looked up at him once more and said quietly, "You spent years building your empire on lies, detective, but you forgot truth doesn't need a badge." Marcus didn't respond, he couldn't. For the first time in his career, he felt fear, not the fear of losing a case, but the fear of being seen for who he truly was. Outside, the press was waiting, their questions sharp and relentless. Flashbulbs blinded him as he pushed past the crowd, his jaw tight, his pride cracking. Somewhere in the chaos, Evelyn walked past him unnoticed, her eyes forward, her expression calm. The battle had only just begun, but Marcus already knew. He wasn't fighting a woman anymore. He was fighting the truth, The courtroom had become quieter with each new day of testimony. The laughter, the chatter, even the polite small talk between lawyers gone, every person in that room now understood what was happening. This was no longer about Evelyn Cross versus Detective Marcus Hale. It was about the truth versus a man who had spent his life burying it. Marcus sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly, jaw clenched. His once crisp suit was wrinkled, his confidence gone. The press had stopped calling him hero and started using words like controversial, under investigation, corrupt. The department had gone silent, no statements, no support. His so-called friends had begun to disappear. And Evelyn, she remained the calm in the center of the storm. Each morning she walked into the courtroom poised and prepared, a single folder in her hands. Her eyes carried no malice, only purpose. She didn't want revenge anymore, she wanted exposure. On the fifth day of trial, Evelyn asked permission to present additional evidence. The judge granted it. When she opened the folder, the courtroom collectively leaned forward. Inside were archived case files, ones the department had long since sealed, each file linked directly to Marcus. One by one, she laid them on the evidence table. "Your Honor," she began, "these are prior cases handled by Detective Hale, all marked as closed, but each contains discrepancies, falsified statements, and altered evidence logs." Marcus's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed her to continue. She picked up the first file. Case 2137, Jason Cross, arrested 7 years ago for armed robbery, evidence obtained without a valid warrant and witness statements altered. The name hit Marcus like a bullet. Jason Cross, Evelyn's brother. The room fell completely silent. Evelyn's voice didn't tremble. "My brother was innocent, but your fabricated report made sure no one would ever believe him. He died in prison 3 years later from injuries caused by another inmate. You called it collateral damage, I call it corruption." Marcus's throat went dry. He tried to speak, but no sound came. For the first time, the truth behind Evelyn's calm became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't random. This was justice, deeply personal, meticulously prepared. She continued, "And it didn't stop there, did it, Detective? Case after case, witnesses coerced, evidence misplaced, confessions forced. You didn't just bend the law, you broke it." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The judge's expression hardened. The jury's eyes burned holes through Marcus. Then came the bombshell. Evelyn revealed emails between Marcus and a district attorney, messages proving that he'd tampered with cases to maintain his conviction record and secure promotions. Each email was authenticated, each timestamp verified. There was no escape now. As the evidence piled higher, Marcus's world began collapsing piece by piece. His once loyal partner, Detective Vaughn, was called to the stand. His voice was heavy with guilt as he confessed to following Marcus's orders even when he knew they were wrong. "He said it was for the greater good," Vaughn murmured. "We just wanted to make him proud." Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras clicked. The city that once worshipped Marcus Hale was watching him fall in real time. By the end of that day, Marcus's badge was suspended pending investigation. He walked out of the courthouse to a sea of flashing lights and shouted questions. "Detective Hale, did you fabricate evidence? Is it true you covered up misconduct? Are you under federal review?" He said nothing. His eyes were hollow, his expression blank. He climbed into his car and sat there for a long time, watching raindrops slide down the windshield like tears he refused to shed. In the silence, his phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It was a single line. "Truth has a longer memory than power, EC." Marcus threw the phone against the dashboard, breathing hard, but anger couldn't drown the guilt rising inside him. Every name Evelyn mentioned replayed in his head, every life he'd ruined, every shortcut he'd taken. For years he'd told himself it was necessary, that the ends justified the means. But now, stripped of his shield, he was forced to see what he'd become. The man who once stood above the law was now beneath it. And yet, even in disgrace, part of him refused to let go. He wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. He still believed he could fight back, twist the narrative, silence Evelyn before she destroyed what was left of his reputation. But what Marcus didn't realize was that Evelyn wasn't finished. She had one final piece of evidence, one that would make sure the entire world saw him for who he truly was. The past had come crashing down, but the fall was only halfway complete. The days following the court hearing were a blur of noise, headlines, and betrayal. Marcus Hale's face, once the pride of the Rockford Police Department, now filled every news screen under the bold headline. Detective accused of corruption and evidence tampering. He watched it all unfold from his small, dimly lit apartment. The blinds were drawn, the air thick with cigarette smoke. The framed commendations that once lined his wall now lay shattered on the floor. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, journalists, lawyers, former colleagues, he ignored them all. For the first time in his life, Marcus was truly alone. His badge was gone, his gun had been confiscated. His so-called friends at the precinct stopped answering his calls. Even his partner, Vaughn, who had testified against him, refused to look him in the eye when they crossed paths. The city he'd once ruled with authority now treated him like a criminal. At night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The silence was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside the window felt like an accusation. He started hearing things, whispers in the dark, echoes of voices from the courtroom. You thought you were untouchable, you killed an innocent man, you can't hide from the truth forever. He drank to silence them, but the more he drank, the louder they got. One night, unable to bear the torment, Marcus grabbed his car keys and drove aimlessly through the city. Rain poured down, blurring the streetlights into bleeding halos. Every corner of Rockford reminded him of something, a crime scene he manipulated, a life he destroyed. It was as if the city itself was turning against him. He parked near the old courthouse, the same place where he'd once been praised as a hero. Now, his name was whispered there like a curse. Then he saw her, Evelyn, standing under an umbrella across the street, calm, composed, watching him. For a moment he thought he was hallucinating, but she didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, her eyes locked on his. There was no hate in them, only something far more haunting, pity. Marcus stumbled out of the car, shouting through the rain, "You think you've won, you ruined my life." Evelyn didn't flinch. "You did that yourself," she said quietly. "I just showed the world what you really are." Her voice was calm, but it sliced through him like a knife. "You wanted power, Marcus, now you have the kind that no one wants, infamy." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night, leaving him trembling, drenched, and hollow. That night, Marcus broke completely. He tore apart his apartment, throwing files, smashing bottles, shouting at ghosts that weren't there. He screamed at the walls, at the world, at himself. "I did what I had to do. I was the only one keeping order." But deep down, he knew the truth. He hadn't been keeping order, he had been feeding his ego. The next morning, he woke up surrounded by the wreckage of his life. Empty bottles, torn papers, broken glass. The only thing still intact was the small metal badge he kept on his nightstand, the same badge he once believed made him invincible. He picked it up, staring at his reflection in its dull surface. The man looking back wasn't the hero he remembered. He was something else entirely. Later that day, a letter arrived, no return address, no name, just a single line typed neatly across the center. "The trial isn't over, truth doesn't end in the courtroom." Inside the envelope was a USB drive. Marcus hesitated, then plugged it into his laptop. The screen came alive with footage, video files, dozens of them. Security camera clips, police interrogation footage, and most damning of all, recorded conversations between Marcus and high-ranking officials. Every word, every cover-up, every lie exposed. It was Evelyn.